thing. And so one of the things, well, I did write about this in my first book, particularly about putting your house in perfect order. It's like, well, if you're lost, one of the things you can do is look around and see what direction you could take locally, is fix something. And I used to tell my clients, this is a very good thing to know. Find something that you could do that would make things better that you would do. And there's a humility in that too, because especially if you're in a low energy state, it's like, oh my God, I don't have enough energy to make dinner. It's like, do you have enough energy to put a fork on the table? And sometimes people are so depressed that that's really all they can do. It's like, can you take a small step forward, no matter how small that is? And so I knew that adrenaline was a byproduct or down the biochemical chain from dopamine, but I didn't get the significance of that fully. So basically what you're saying is that if you implement a micro routine, even something like washing a cup and putting it back in the shelf, and you know that's a good thing because you have a shelf and there's cups on it, you've already decided that's an appropriate way to live, is to have your coffee cups on a shelf. If you go ahead with cleaning out the cup and putting it on the shelf, then you've taken steps towards a valuable micro goal. You get a dopamine kick from that. That transforms itself into adrenaline and energizes you. So that's partly the reason that it has an antidepressant effect.
That's right. And then you can lean into another behavior. I mean, some of the more successful classes of antidepressants, again, not for everybody, are the ones of the dopaminergic, adrenalinergic variety, right? Things like bupropion, as opposed to, there's a lot of debate about SSRIs. They tap into a different system. You asked about gene expression changes. There's neuroplasticity, which is on the short scale. Completion of an even trivial task like the putting away of the cup will give you more dopamine, which gives you more adrenaline, which in this analogy of either being back on one's heels, flat-footed, or forward center of mass, regardless of where one is starting out, let's say depressed is back on one's heels, it's going to tilt you forward a little bit. And then it's a question of what you do with it. So the cognitive appraisal is critical because, again, with the prefrontal cortex being so critical in establishing which of these loops gets repeated, the cognitive appraisal is critical. I'm somebody who can get things done, even if they're small.
Or you can take another cognitive appraisal there too, which is, it's small things are not small.
That's right.
Precisely for the reason that we just described. It's like you might have the cognitive appraisal that doing something local, like cleaning up your room, is small, but it's not obvious at all that that's the case. It's not that trivial to put your immediate surroundings in order. And it can easily be the stepping stone to putting things in order on a broader scale. In fact, it's probably the necessary stepping stone to do that. And so they might seem small, but they're a step ahead, and ahead is a good direction.
Absolutely.
And so they're not as small as you might think. And so you can pat yourself on the back, especially if you're depressed, a little harder than you might otherwise by saying, you say, well, this is trivial, but I did it. It's like, no. If you're moving ahead, tilting yourself forward in your metaphor, that's not small. You just keep doing that, and you're going to get out of this paralyzed or retreat mode. And then God only knows what you're going to be able to do. My dad was a school teacher. He's still alive. And he got disenchanted with school teaching in part because all of the authority in his classroom was taken from him. So if there were disciplinary issues in the class, it had to be brought up the hierarchy to the administrative echelons above him. And so he could feel his authority in the class slipping away. And he was quite an authoritative teacher. My dad was my teacher in grade 6 for math. I wasn't in his homeroom. But I remember, and by grade 6, this is about 12 years old, kids are pretty pushy and fractious, And 10 minutes before the class started, the first time my dad walked into the room, everyone was silent. Because he had a reputation, and the reputation was, don't mess with him. And it wasn't because he was mean. He had a hard spine, and you didn't want to push him. But he was authoritative. And he also got disenchanted with television. So when he was young, and even when I was young, there were shows like My Three Sons and Father Knows Best. Can you imagine a show called Father Knows Best now? The closest I've seen to that recently is Ted Lasso. That's the only sitcom I've seen for like 5 decades in some sense that has a genuinely positive male lead. So kudos to Ted Lasso. you see that a little bit in The Simpsons, hey? Because that's why it was such an interestingly subversive show, because Homer's a bumbling fool. And Marge, in some sense, has the moral upper hand, but not entirely. But Homer, the thing about Homer is he's trying. He's not very bright, but he is trying. And he would like to be a good father, and he's faithful to his wife and his kids. And so there is this underlying solidity of that male character, but, you know, it's damning with faint praise. And now young men, they're under assault from two directions, fundamentally. One is all male authority is nothing but patriarchal oppression. And so imagine now you're an ambitious young man, which is the drive toward that authority. Well, all that is a manifestation of the power dynamic in men that produced the patriarchal, oppressive, colonial tyranny. And so now you're a moral young man, you think, well, my ambition is to be, not only to be questioned, it's to be squelched entirely, because it's nothing but a manifestation of power. Imagine that maybe you escape from that by some maneuvering, but then there's another assault that's waiting, which is all human activity is nothing but part of the force that's devouring the planet and that's going to put us all in flames. It's like, oh good, so not only am I part of the patriarchal oppressive force, but I'm also the despoiler of Mother Nature. And so if you tell boys that constantly, and you do, and then you also say, all of the sexual advances that you make towards women on any front whatsoever are to be regarded with extreme skepticism, and then you feed them pornography on a non-stop basis, so there's an easy way out, and that's an unbelievably powerful...
Oh, it's a drug.
Oh, well, you know, no one really thinks this through in some sense, but any 12-year-old boy, 13-year-old boy can now see more beautiful naked women in 15 minutes than the richest king in history ever saw in his whole life. You think, well, you know, we don't have to worry about that. It's like, yeah, you have to worry about that. That's a huge problem. And it's a demoralizing problem because it offers an easy way out. If all of your ambition is nothing but the junior manifestation of power and should be squelched out of you as early as possible, and schools do this because they punish boys for playing, so hyperactivity looks like suppressed play behavior. So there's good animal models of that, by the way, and you can, if you deprive animals of play, especially juvenile male animals, a lot of this has been done with rats because they're very playful, by the way. If you deprive them of play, they'll play hyperactively when you give them the opportunity. And you can suppress that with methylphenidate. That's Ritalin. It suppresses play behavior. Now it focuses attention, attention deficit. It's like, no, probably not. These boys just need to be out in the playground, running around playing like for more time than they're allowed with their boisterous competitive play behavior, you know, and we don't need competition. You know, all games should be cooperative, which is complete rubbish. Wow. It's not a game if it's just cooperative, and it's such a dopey view of cooperation. Like if you and I are playing one-on-one basketball, then, well, are we cooperating or competing? Well, did you bring a chessboard? No. You came to play basketball. Mm-hmm. Well, how about that's cooperation? We've decided what the rules are going to be. That's cooperation. Obviously, fundamental. We're playing the same game. That's cooperation. Think it through. And so then, are we competing? Well, yes, but what does that mean? It means, well, we're getting in each other's way in some sense while we're trying to hit the goal. But we're doing that in a way that improves our skill at hitting the goal. Because if you set up an obstacle to me, which is what you do if we're playing one-on-one basketball, you're making it difficult for me to hit the target. Mm-hmm. And so that means you're making me better at hitting the target. And if we do that optimally, then it's fun. And you might say, why? Well, the word sin is derived from a Greek word, hamartia, and there's a Jewish parallel semantic track, by the way, that has the same underlying structure. Hamartia is an archery term. It means to miss the target. And so what we're trying to do is hit the target. Well, what's the target? Well, that's the question. It's a hard question. But we're trying to hit the target. And how do you know? Well, what are people doing when they're playing sports? Like all sports, virtually, are circulate around hitting the target. Mm-hmm. It might be crossing the finish line first, so the target would be being the fastest among that group. So that would be swimming, let's say. Or it might be football, in all of its variants. Obviously, you're hitting the target. That's what basketball is. That's what shooting is. That's what archery is. It's all hitting the target. Now, we're hunting creatures. We're based on a hunting platform. And we're visual hunters too. And so we're looking at targets all the time and trying to hit them. And part of what we're doing when we're competing is we set a joint target. And then we set up an adversarial structure that improves our skill while we practice hitting the target. And so is that competition? It's like, well, no. It's not competition in that the goal is to defeat you, even though I'm going to try to win because otherwise the game's no fun. The real game is, can we make each other better in a sustainable way so that we can hit the target more effectively? And men, especially on the sports pitch, of course women do this too, but it's more of a masculine enterprise in some sense. It's a masculine enterprise, not a male enterprise, not for men only. It's honing your ability to hit the target. And when you deviate from the target, deviation from the target, that's sin. That's what it means. It's so useful to know that. It's like, well, I missed the mark, and then you're guilty about it. Well, you should be. You're supposed to hit the mark. And what's the mark? Well, the mark is the line between order and chaos. Or the mark is the playful engagement in good conversation. The mark is a really intense game, eh? An intense game is you're serious about it. The person is pushing you right to your bloody limit, and vice versa.